I recently played the last DLC for the Souls franchise, namely the Ring City DLC for Dark Souls 3, and when I finished with it, I was in awe of the amount of lore and lore implications contained within it. So I quickly ran to YouTube, Reddit, and other places in the interwebs to read what other people had said or what other people had thought about the lore. And lo and behold, I found one word kept repeating more than any other, specifically referring to the lore of this DLC: disappointing. Now, I understand that expectations play very high while rating any game, and the expectations were uncharacteristically high on this DLC, especially with it being the last DLC for such a successful and beloved franchise as Dark Souls, and the amount of high FromSoft generated around it did not help any either. However, I found myself disagreeing with a lot of the arguments brought forth against the lore of this DLC, especially the ones that marked it as shallow or unrelated to the rest of the franchise. It is during this time that I decided to make this video. I think that a lot of the people that are regarding this DLC as the most disappointing thing From Software has released since Dark Souls 2 came out, and it was completely different from all of the network tests and beta, they just do not know enough about the lore. Or maybe they just have not looked closely enough at the repercussions the lore of this DLC might have in the overarching universe of Dark Souls. This video should serve as my humble attempt to elucidate the people that might already know something about the lore of this game as to the importance of the lore of this DLC. So, without further ado, I will begin. One of the most lore-shattering revelations that we find in this DLC is the introduction of the Pygmy Lords. In the past, we had known of the furtive Pygmy, the founder of the Dark Soul, and we knew that the Pygmy had divided the Dark Soul he found and had spread it around. However, we did not know how or when this had happened, and the identity of the Pygmy was a complete mystery. Nevertheless, there were several theories that pointed toward the Pygmy being Manus, and yet some others pointing towards it being Velka. Yeah, I'm looking at you, the Ashen Hollow. However, this new DLC has changed some very important aspects of the lore of this character. I know, we are no closer to knowing the definitive identity of the furtive Pygmy itself, but the introduction of the Pygmy Lords has made this a very irrelevant fact indeed. Even though we might not know it for a fact, one can infer, due to the even size of the thrones, and how they are displayed in an even manner, as we can see over here, that all of the Pygmy Lords were equal, and therefore they all had been endowed with an equal amount of the Dark Soul. This, in and of itself, negates the absolute need for a definitive identity for the furtive Pygmy, as in the end, the furtive Pygmy just ended up dividing his power equally with his peers. There are, however, many things within the lore that have not changed, as in the end, the Pygmies still seem to be the progenitors of all mankind. This also does not put a nail in the coffin on neither the Manus theory nor the Velka one, as either of them very easily might just be one of the Pygmy Lords going rogue, or in the case of Manus, completely batshit insane. There are other very important facts around the Pygmy Lords, early humans, and their relationship with the gods that were also changed in this DLC. Before the DLC came out, it was a safe assumption to think that after the Lords challenged the dragons, the Pygmy, and by extension humans, had had nothing to do with this war. After all, the Pygmy was the only founder of a Lord Soul that had not been mentioned in the introduction cinematic of Dark Souls 1 as having fought the dragons in any way, shape, or form. This led a lot of us to believe, and I include myself in this group, that while Gwyn, Nito, and the Witch of Isolith were busy fighting the dragons, the furry pygmy had been busy just dividing his dark soul and spreading it to his descendants. We did not know it at the time, but we could not have been further away from the truth. During our expedition in the Ring City, we find numerous pieces of equipment, as well as weapons, that the first humans used in the war against the dragons. This is huge, as it changes how a lot of us view the lore of the age before Dark Souls 1 took place. Another thing that has changed dramatically due to this DLC is our understanding of the Abyss. Before it, we safely assumed that the Abyss was a spreading corruption, a seething perversion that spouted from humanity gone wild, like with Manus and Ulusil. Or it was what happened when the humanity within humans had been manipulated and tainted somehow, like with the Four Kings and New Londo, and that once it had taken root, it would spread, slowly but surely, and not even the most unbendable wheel of steel would be able to withstand it, like Artorias or the Abyss Watchers. However, we learned through this DLC that the Abyss is something that has always been intricately linked with humanity, and that in fact, early humans used it to benefit their own means. So in the end, the Abyss was not born out of the seething hate seeping out of Manus due to what was done to him in Ulusil, but it has always been intricately bound to the Dark Soul, and it might just be one of his properties. In fact, we find out that early humans used the Abyss to forge their weapons and armor, and as such, imbue them with some power emanating from the Dark Soul. We also learned that these weapons were somewhat alive, as they, quoting the game, betray a smidgen of life. This alive property might just be imbued into the weapon by having it being forged in the Abyss using the Dark Soul, as using Gwyn's Light Soul seems to imbue weapons with lightning. We also find out that the gods feared this power emanating from the Abyss, so they cast a seal of fire upon these weapons and the ones that wielded them. The implications of this might be gargantuan, but we will revisit this point a little bit later. So we have found that the ancient humans fought against the archdragons, but how did this come to be specifically? I believe there is one item and one character that can shed a lot of light on this topic. The character is Fillianore, the last daughter of Gwyn, and the item is the banner we find after fighting the Demon Prince. The banner reads, "The small banner used by envoys of the great Lord Gwyn in the days of yore. Face the ring cliff and hold the banner high to summon facilitators of transport. For the Pygmies who took the Dark Soul, the great Lord gifted the Ring City, an isolated place at world's end, and his beloved youngest daughter, promising her that he would come for her when the day came." What we get from this item description is that Gwyn already had considerable power, and he decided to give an entire city as a gift to the Pygmy Lords, including his beloved youngest daughter. I believe that the purpose behind this is twofold. First, by leaving his daughter Fillianore in care of the Pygmies and giving them a walled city, at the end of the world, mind you, Gwyn guaranteed that the Pygmies, and more importantly the Dark Soul, would be contained and out of the way. I think that Gwyn did not trust the Dark Soul, the counterbalance to his Light Soul. However, I do not think Gwyn thought the Pygmies were evil, or they were inherently bad themselves. If Gwyn truly did not trust and really despised the Pygmies as much, why didn't he imprison them or take other equally harsh measures?
Fillianore, help me.
We find proof for the isolation of the Pygmy Lords in the dialogue of the stone-humped hag.
The Ring City is said to be at world's end. Past this heap of rubbish as far as one can go. But you'd better think twice. The forsaken Ring City was walled off by the gods to contain the Pygmies. And the Dark soul is better left well alone.
Now, since the Stormhump hag does not seem to know this information firsthand, she might just be an unreliable narrator regarding this particular fact, and all that she says might just be hearsay. However, since we do not have any concrete evidence that contradicts this in the form of any item description, we will take it as true, at least for the time being. The second reason Gwyn decided to give the Pygmies a city is a little bit more benevolent. By Gwyn bestowing a city and arguably their crowns onto the Pygmies, as shown by this statue found in the Ring City, Gwyn is shown as a superior deity to them, and they seem to submit to his power. Instead, I present to you that the reason Gwyn gave them the Ring City and left Fillianore there was to bargain for their support and their help. We already know that the dragons were magnificent enemies by the dialogue of Hawkeye Go.
The dragons shall never be forgotten. We knights fought valiantly, but for every one of them, we lost 70 of our own. Exhilaration, pride, hatred, rage. The dragons teased out our dearest emotions. Thou will understand one day.
Now, I think Gwyn and the other lords knew about the Pygmies and did not really pay much attention to them until they faced the dragons. Evidently, after fighting the dragons for a while, they noticed that in order to succeed, they would need all the help they could get, and so Gwyn turned to the Lord of the Fourth Soul, the Furry Pygmy himself, or in this case, themselves. Gwyn was revered for his power, but this alone would not necessarily be enough to persuade the Pygmies to fight the dragons. However, if they were to be gifted their own city, be made into lords, and even have Gwyn leave his own daughter under their care, all of these signs of inclusions would be enough to persuade the Pygmies and the early men to join the fray. However, the abyss power that they wielded was too frightening for Gwyn and the other lords, who decided to seal their weapons with fire as to contain the abyss within them. I think that this might have been done in a duplicitous manner, and they probably used the Witch of Isolate to do this, because if not, why not contain them with lightning? But that is not really very important. Now, by duplicitous manner, I mean that they misled the early men into believing they were imbuing their weapons with more power, while they really were only sealing them. Nevertheless, this is mere speculation, as Gwyn might have just set his conditions for cooperation, and in the end, the Dragon Shield does say, "The Ring Knights, by command of the gods, stood among the ranks who set out to slay the dragons, but their contributions were never lauded." So it is quite apparent from this that the gods and early men were not on equal footing. In the end, even through all of their sacrifices, early men's contributions to the fight against the dragons were not lauded, or arguably even acknowledged. A lot of people have argued that the Ring City was a gift to the Pygmies for having fought the dragons, but since the contributions were never lauded, this is not very likely. Also, the gods had a deep distrust of the abyss, and they would rather seal it than let it be a source of strength, even if it would aid them in their fight against the dragons. So anything associated to the abyss was not to be commended, even men. There is another big issue brought forth by this seal. In the end, what is a dark abyss surrounded by fire? No, it's okay. I'll give you a couple of seconds. Wrong. No, it's not Quaylag's sexy spider ass, nor the bed of chaos. Bullshit, boss. It is not even Wolnir's weird ass with his dark pyromancies. A dark abyss surrounded by fire is the dark sign, the mark of the undead. I think this DLC gives us a more thorough understanding of how the Darkside came to be, and even though this is heavy speculation, I think it is safe to assume that the curse of the undead was ultimately the fault of the gods and the seal that they placed upon men, as them fearing and trying to seal the abyss within men and their weapons ultimately bound the humanity of mankind to the bonfires. To be honest, I am quite on the fence regarding if this binding of humanity to the bonfires was accidental or deliberate. It is very easy to see how much of a benefit to the gods it would be to have the ones afflicted by the mark of the undead scrambling to burn humanity at the bonfires, but this point has been made before, so I will leave it at that. Now, let's go back to a character we mentioned before, Princess Fillianore. As we pointed out before, Princess Fillianore was Lord Gwyn's beloved youngest daughter. We also mentioned the possible neutral feelings Gwyn might have had towards the Pygmy lords, and we provided as proof the fact that he left his beloved daughter, and I'm putting emphasis on the word beloved, under their care. However, we have not spoken yet about the relationship between the Pygmies and Fillianore. Now, we can clearly see throughout the DLC that the relationship between the Pygmies and Fillianore is a positive one. Furthermore, we can clearly see that the Pygmies respect Fillianore's power, as when Gale is killing them all, the last Pygmy alive is crawling to try and have Fillianore save them. So Fillianore was not only there to keep an eye on them, but to also protect them. We can also look into Shira's dialogue for a clue to this.
I bid thee take not from the princess her peace or rest. As the fire waneth, does she lie by the dark, all for the sake of man.
What we can gather from this piece of dialogue is that Fillianore's sleep has her being in the dark, so it is somewhat of a seal, and it is allowing men to stay in the age of fire, or something like this. However, I'm planning to make a video dealing with Fillianore specifically in the future. So regarding the Pygmy lords, in the end, they did survive until the end of time, with the help of Fillianore, until Gale decided to consume their dark soul. But that is a story for another time. Now, I hope this video helped change some minds regarding the disappointing nature of this DLC, at least regarding the lore. I am very interested to know what you think about these ideas, so please leave your comments below. Also, if you like this video, please help me by giving it a like, and if you like my content, please subscribe. This was Cheps, and I'll be seeing you next time.